There's a small object in the collection of Austria's Kunsthistorisches Museum that carries an enormous claim. It's a devil, not a painting of a devil trapped inside glass, or in German, im Glase. A tiny black figure, sharp-edged, horned, crouching, embedded in a faceted prism like an insect in amber. The museum dates it to the early 1600s. It stands just 6.6 centimeters tall, cast in black lead, sealed in glass, and filed under an inventory number like evidence from a crime scene, QI 6211. And then comes the sentence that shouldn't exist. A 1720 inventory of Vienna's imperial treasury records an extraordinary claim. This object was not symbolic. The entry reads, quote, "A spiritualis familiaris in a glass, formerly driven out of a possessed person and banished into this glass. Not folklore, not rumor, paperwork. A supernatural claim written into an official record. It's displayed alongside other Kunstkammer wonders, Renaissance collections of oddities where art, early science, and the unexplainable were meant to coexist." So, what are we actually looking at? Because long before this object was made, Europe already told stories of devils trapped in containers, stories with dates, witnesses, and an emperor who ordered a servant to climb into the rafters to retrieve a devil sealed in glass, until the man reached the vault and fainted. To understand the Vienna object, we have to go backward into monasteries, exorcisms, and the strange rituals that made demon containment feel like a real possibility. One of the most famous devils in glass didn't sit behind museum glass. It hung in a church ceiling. The Devil's Trap. In the early 1500s, a Cistercian monk named Johann Canaparius wrote a chronicle of Kaisheim Abbey, an imperial monastery in Bavaria. In it is a section with a mysterious title, How the Devil Came into the Glass at Kaisheim. Half a page is left blank after the heading, as if someone was supposed to draw what happened next. Canaparius doesn't treat this as folklore. He writes it as history, something Kaisheim was known for. Additional details preserved in related chronicles and other sources were gathered and published by the researcher Paul Beck in 1911. The story begins far away in the Alps at the monastery of St. Lambrecht, a place Canaparius describes as a kind of spiritual emergency room for possession cases. There, Duke Meinhard of Carinthia arrived with his daughter, possessed, and he's desperate. The monks try every rite they know. Nothing works. Then the demon speaks. It declares that no one at St. Lambrecht can drive it out except one lay brother from Kaisheim. Not a saint, not a bishop, a specific monk with a specific vow. The demon isn't choosing him for holiness. It's choosing him because he's sworn never to leave Kaisheim. In Canaparius' telling, this is a moral trap. If the brother refuses, he's disobedient. If he goes, he breaks his vow. Either way, the demon hopes to drag him into sin. But monastic life has a different hierarchy of rules, and the demon bets on the wrong one. When the request reaches Kaisheim, the abbot orders the brother to go under obedience, a rule higher than personal vows. Canaparius sums up the logic in one line: obedience is greater than sacrifice. So the brother goes. When he arrives at St. Lambrecht, the demon reacts instantly, screaming and thrashing. The brother doesn't negotiate. He commands it into silence. Then comes the containment. The demon is forced out of the girl and into a tiny iron box. Canaparius calls it a little cage, and sealed with a chilling clause. The devil may not escape even if the container breaks. Now the story has an object, the devil that hung in the rafters. The brother carries the box back to Kaisheim, where the devil is transferred into a glass vessel and hung high in the church vault above the choir, like a supernatural exhibit. Canaparius insists that in his own day, it was still hanging there, often tested by curious visitors and continually shown. One man reached the glass and was seized by terror so intense, he writes, it felt, quote, as if a whole legion of devils surrounded him. He collapsed where he stood. Locals even coined a saying, "I'll show you the devil in the glass." And the legend grows. Beck reports that other chronicles mention the captive devil again in 1483, 1493, and 1510, like scheduled safety checks on a dangerous artifact still suspended overhead. He also finds record of a bizarre incident during choir practice. 50 monks struggle to start their chant on the right tone when the devil heckles them from the rafters in Latin. Quote, 50 monks in the choir, and they don't know the fifth tone. Then comes the imperial cameo. According to records, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III visits Kaisheim with his son, the young Maximilian. Spotting the glass, the emperor orders a bold servant to climb into the vault, pull it closer, and look at the devil to see if he might learn something. The servant climbs, he reaches the glass and faints, collapsing among the beams. He refuses to approach it ever again. Finally, in 1543, after more than 2 centuries, lightning strikes the church. The glass shatters, and as Beck puts it, the devil, quote, goes to the devil. But the legend lingers. Beck notes that a wood carving depicting the devil in glass survived into modern times before vanishing. And in 1751, a ceiling panel was painted at Lutheim Castle, once the residence of a vineyard owned by Kaisheim Abbey, still seen today. It shows a clergyman pointing out the devil in the glass to a group of boys, as if documenting a moral lesson. So when a Habsburg clerk in 1720 wrote, quote, Spiritualis familiaris banished into the glass, they're not inventing a new idea. They're tapping into an entire ecosystem of belief, the glass that made a devil. By the early modern period, the church had standardized exorcisms. Priests followed prescribed formulas. They commanded the demon by name. They forced it to respond. One common line, preserved in multiple manuals, is, quote, I command you, unclean spirit, tell me your name. And people expected results, tangible results. Contemporary observers describe convulsions, screams, sudden silence, and in many reported cases, the expulsion of strange objects like pins, nails, or stones. Once that logic takes hold, that evil can be expelled, it's not a big leap to the next idea. What if the thing could be contained? The church drew a hard line here. Exorcisms were meant to banish, not imprison, but people kept experimenting, often enough that authorities repeatedly condemned the practice. As early as 1326, Pope John XXII's papal bull, Super Ilius Specula, condemns those who make, quote, a ring, or a mirror, or a file, or anything whatsoever to bind demons and seek answers from them. Pope Sixtus V's 1586 constitution echoed the same language, a fear that later reappears in the 1653 Inquisition manual Sacrorum Arsenale, which defines wizards and witches first as those who keep demons constrained in rings, mirrors, metals, and other objects. And court records from Italy from the 15th and 16th centuries describe multiple trials involving people accused of owning a sphera vitrea, a glass sphere or ball, explicitly described as, quote, replete with a demon. In a 1602 letter to the Inquisition, the poet Alessandro Tassoni describes one such object he was accused of owning, a sealed glass ball about the size of a goose egg with no visible opening, still full of water. Inside it was a tiny horned figure that flipped and tumbled when the sphere was turned, its face black like ink. In Tassoni's case, he insists it wasn't supernatural at all, just a novelty made by a Murano glass artisan. Belief in the practice was widespread enough to require legislation, and the Vienna object sits right in that shadow zone between forbidden magic and approved ritual. And sometimes glass didn't even need a real demon to cause panic. In 1632, the Jesuit theologian Adam Tanner died in the village of Unken in Austria. Tanner had spent his career arguing against witch hunts, urging people not to exaggerate the power of demons. Locals searching his belongings found a magnifying glass, a gift from the scientist Christoph Scheiner, and, trapped within layers of the glass, a mosquito. Magnified, the insect looked hairy and monstrous. Villagers declared it a glastoffel, a glass devil. They demanded Tanner be denied Christian burial as a sorcerer in league with the devil. Only when the village priest demonstrated how the lens worked did the devil shrink back into a bug. That's the world the Vienna artifact comes from, a world where glass could manufacture belief as easily as it recorded it. So what is this thing really? A devil in the details. Before we close the case, there is one more document, quiet, easily missed, that bends this entire story in the opposite direction. Long before the Habsburg treasurers stamped Spiritualis Familiaris onto the object, before the museum labels leaned into the supernatural, the same object appears in a different, lesser-known record, a 1659 inventory of the private art collection of Austrian Archduke Leopold Wilhelm. There, in the middle of a long section labeled Curiosities, is a simple description, quote, A small square glass containing a black little man in the shape of a devil. No claims of sorcery, no exorcism, no trapped spirit. It was cataloged as an art object, exactly the sort of playful marvel the Renaissance collectors loved, strange enough to admire, harmless enough to display. And yet, by 1720, something shifts. When the object moves into the Austrian imperial treasury, its description mutates. The new catalog entry no longer calls it art. It calls it a prisoner, a demon driven out of a possessed person and sealed into the glass. This creates a fascinating reverse trajectory. In the 17th century, it was art. By the Age of Enlightenment, it had become a monster. And that leaves us with a final, uncomfortable question. What are we really looking at? Is this tiny devil nothing more than clever craftsmanship, an early modern Murano glass trick, like the ones Alessandro Tassoni once described? Or did some imperial clerk in 1720 know something we don't? Did a real exorcist once truly believe, that a dangerous spirit had been contained inside this fragile cage? Because the object doesn't answer. It just sits there, 6.6 centimeters tall, its horned silhouette frozen inside its faceted crystal cell, waiting for us to decide whether we're looking at a forgotten piece of glasswork or a supernatural prisoner that has spent 400 years silently watching us in return. If you had been that museum clerk in 1720, what would you have written in the ledger? Artwork or genuine demon? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching Mistress. Like and subscribe to continue exploring the greatest mysteries of this world and beyond.